All righty. Good morning, everybody. Hope everybody's doing well. We've got our show favorite, and seems like everybody's been excited since we dropped the news that Mr. Terry was going to be back. We've got Mr. Terry joining us. He's going to end up talking about actually a few things. He's going to be talking a little bit about the reunion last month, the fifth group reunion, and he's also going to be talking about a book that he's recently finished that we're going to be speaking about a particular subject that will deal with the show we're doing tomorrow evening with the family member of the man mentioned. So, without further ado, since it's been so long, I'm going to go ahead and hand it off to Mr. Terry and let him get started for the day.
Good morning, everybody. I feel like we're starting all over again. It's been such a dry spell, with Bud's family problems and just all the other crap that's going on. But we're back. Um, on some of the other like SOG Facebook groups and what have you, recently there seems to be a lot of questions, comments, interest about POWs, were they left behind, blah, blah, blah. I'm Any comments I make, you know how I am. Any comments I make are my personal opinion. However, um, I just finished reading this book. It's called Inside Hanoi's Secret Archives by a guy named Theodore Schweitzer. This guy managed back in like 89, 90 timeframe. He managed to get access in North Vietnam to their secret archives. And he what he told them was, I'm writing a book, blah, blah, blah. And the truth be known, and it's all told in the book, that he was also working with the government. The government paid for all this fancy computer equipment that he needed and all that. But they allowed him to actually digitally scan most of their records having to do with POWs. And in the book, it shows, for instance, it shows actual photographs that he scanned of stuff like ID cards, dog tags, whatever, of some of our missing people who were never accounted for. Tim Collier and your guest tomorrow are supposed to be joining us on this. And with their permission, yesterday, they want me to talk about their relative who, James Kelly Patterson, who was the backseater in an A6 that was shot down. He's on the left there. His pilot, Red McDaniels, was taken prisoner and was released. And it's another one of them deals that
He was rescued, actually, if I'm not mistaken.
he was rescued. He was held prisoner. He was released in 73.
That's right.
And then he became, I guess, what you'd call like a radical. Some of the stories he told were debunked. Nevertheless, um, um, in this book, I found this is coming straight from the North Vietnamese. Let's see. So there's a lot of rumors that the Soviets were interested in the backseaters who were like, in some planes, they were called the radar intercept officer or something like that. The Soviets wanted to interrogate them because they wanted to try to find out what were our tactics, what was the equipment being used to deflect like rockets or missiles from shooting them down and all that. And this book, significantly, many of the surviving prisoner A6 crewmen were bombardier navigators whose specialized technical training reputedly made them targets of any secret Soviet dragnet that had been cast to siphon away important American prisoners. Perhaps the most famous missing A6 crewman is Navy Lieutenant James Patterson, who was Red McDaniel's bombardier. Although their plane was lost above latitude 20, in other words, far north, the shoot-down occurred in the jungle mountains west of Hanoi. Now, this is one of these things that McDaniel's made a statement that I don't know how much credence you can give to it, but he believes that his crewmate was taken to the Soviet Union where he was still alive, according to McDaniel's. Well, how does he know he's still alive, right? It's another one of those things you have to draw your own conclusions to. But in 1985, the Vietnamese turned over Patterson's military identity and Geneva Convention cards to American MIA investigators. Then in December 1990, the Joint Casualty Resolution Center field teams interviewed witnesses who stated that the same militia unit that captured McDaniel shot Patterson to death. His buried remains were said to have been dug up with animals. Well, so you're getting two different stories from the North Vietnamese. And like this book really goes on to explain, I mean, it's given names of the North Vietnamese military people that he's dealing with and all that. And he's got these people and he's naming them by names, and you're getting different answers depending on which North Vietnamese person you talk to. Just like in this, one person tells the author of the book he was sent to Russia. Another person says he was shot to death and buried and animals dug up his grave, so you'll never find the remains. And what I found in going through this book was all these contradictions coming from the North Vietnamese, because they were more concerned about, and made a lot of comments to that effect, they were more concerned about saving face than they were about giving definitive proof on certain individuals. If I had to form an opinion after reading this whole book, which is pretty thick and it's really small print, I got to believe that Lieutenant Commander Patterson was sent to Russia because of his knowledge of the equipment in the plane that he was responsible for. There's articles in this book, there's stories about caves in Laos that supposedly contained American POWs. Again, my personal opinion, I believe that there's a large number of Americans who were held in Laos in caves. The Laotians never agreed to release any Americans whatsoever. So it's another one of those things that, are we ever going to know anything? The Laotians didn't keep all these records like the North Vietnamese were, I don't know what the right term would be, but they were, there's Tim Collier. Hey, Tim. The North Vietnamese were so convinced that it was more important to save face than to provide the truth on a lot of these cases. And by a lot of these cases, so many of them are ones where it's strongly believed or known that the person was captured alive, but yet there's never been any accounting of them. And Lieutenant Commander Patterson is one of those. Do I believe that he was sent to Russia? Hell yeah. But then you got one of these North Vietnamese talking about how the Russians were constantly pressuring them to turn over American POWs that fit the technical specs of Commander Patterson. being the backseat guy, he was familiar with all the weaponry and all that. Then you get another guy that says, yeah, they pressured us, but if they started pressuring us to turn over somebody, we'd go to the Chinese, and we were playing the Chinese against the Russians, and then that would divert the Russians' attention from bugging us to turn somebody over, and we never turned anybody over. Do I believe that? You got to form your own opinion. There's so much detail in this book, though, about as he gathered and was able to photograph all these records, he was at least able to shed a lot of light on the fate of a lot of these guys. The thing that, Mary Jo, hold your ears. The thing that pisses me off to no end in reading this book and what I've already known is, and names are named in the book, American politicians and even people involved in the Joint Casualty Resolution Center, they had it fixed in their mind that there were no living American POWs left in Laos. Well, if you've got that attitude or belief, how much attention are you going to give to some of the reports of either live sightings? It's known that some aviators, especially who were killed when their plane crashed, their remains were taken by villagers. They were secretly buried in the hopes that later on they could sell those remains for money. That's still going on today. And another comment that was made by one of the North Vietnamese people that this author was dealing with was, you're looking for over 1,000 and some people. We're looking for over 300,000 of our men who are missing. What are you going to do about that? Well, what do? You drop napalm on 1,000 men out in the open. What's left? So, you got a recon team that's being overrun and you work airstrikes right on top of them. There ain't going to be nothing left but hamburger. So it's very difficult on our end to provide any resolution that they're looking for. But they continue. They want to trade tit for tat. They want to trade information. They want us to give them stuff, and then they'll give us. But they're just feeding us a little bit at a time, and that's why. Yeah, okay. So last year you may have had, I don't know the actual number, but let's say you may have had 5 or 6 sets of remains recovered. Who knows how many sets of remains they're holding for a year where there's a dry spell and there's not many being recovered. One of the problems with recovery, especially with the air crews, is the ground in Vietnam is so acidic that it doesn't take a lot of years for that acidic ground to destroy the remains. It'll rot the bones and everything, and pretty soon there's nothing left to find. And that's sad. If anybody's interested in reading this book, if you're really interested in this, I got this book from a company. I get these catalogs, at least once a week. It's a company called Edward R. Hamilton Booksellers. And what they do is they get books from publishers that haven't been sold. And like this book was, I don't know. It was probably, when it was sold, it was probably $30. And I paid less than $10 for it. So, I'm going to send the book to Bud. I can't get it to him in time for the show tomorrow, but it can give him a lot of background for future shows. And Bud just posted a link. Yeah.
There's a few copies on Amazon, it looks like, hard
Okay.
and old paperbacks.
And like I say, I paid less than $10 for this book. So be careful what you're looking at. If they're wanting to charge you $30 or something, don't do it. Just go to this publisher and you can order it, for next to nothing. I guess at this point, because my memory, I mean, there's so many specific details on so many missing guys. But the thing that, like I said, that really pissed me off in reading the book was how a lot of our own government people were willing to just, let's move on. That was so many years ago. And, is there any question that we left people behind? I don't know how anybody can truly believe that we didn't leave people behind, especially when you know the mentality of the North Vietnamese and how they thought and still think today. Again, it's trade for trade. And I guess, Bud, is if people have specific questions on the book, and then we can move on to the reunion. And then I think we probably, since it's been so long, open it up for questions. I don't know, whatever, you're running the show.
I don't think we have any questions on the POW stuff. So
Okay.
whichever way you'd like to, or if you see any that I haven't seen,
I haven't seen any. So I guess moving on to the fifth group reunion. So in 2022, I saw something on Facebook about one of the Special Forces Association chapters, the one in St. Louis, having their annual fundraiser, and it was in a town, a suburb of St. Louis. I used to live close to there, but now I'm about an hour and a half away. So I told my wife we're going, and so we go up there, and it's at the local Elks Club. And fifth group sent a team up from Fort Campbell with a lot of the weapons and equipment and a bunch of drones, different drones that they use, which I thought was cool as hell because drones is the technology right now. And so I met them, and I met some of the guys. Of course, I wore one of my SOG shirts. So they see the SOG shirt, and then all of a sudden I got all these new buddies and stuff. And the one guy says, well, do you ever go to the fifth group reunion? And it's like, what fifth group reunion? I guess I missed the invitation. He said, oh, they have one every year in September in the week containing the 21st, which is September 21st, 1964 was when fifth group was first. They call it stood up. Some people might call it founded, but it's when fifth group began. So he's like, it's next month. Get on our website. You can look at the schedule of events, blah, 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 and go. So naturally, I got on there and I signed up and I went. I went by myself. And you get down there and they've got all these activities starting on Monday through Saturday. And it's a fundraiser by the Chapter 38 Special Forces Association and fifth group working together to do this reunion. And they have stuff, a golf tournament, fishing trips. On what day is it? Tuesday or Wednesday morning. If you want to go watch a jump, they do a special jump for guys that are injured. Like say a guy's got a broken leg or something, they wrap his leg in plastic. He jumps out of a chopper into the river. They pull him out, and that way he stays on jump status. So on Wednesday, we went to Nashville. First, we went to a recording studio that the president of the SFA chapter, a friend of his, owns the recruiting. So we talked to some of the guys about, and the band there was they were on break from touring with Randy Travis. So they're talking about recording songs, being on the road, and all that kind of stuff. Then we went to a restaurant called The Palm in Nashville, and we had this lunch that was like, oh my God. They told us that if we were to buy that meal ourselves, it was $150 a plate. And it was paid for by Charlie Daniels Foundation. And every year, Charlie Daniels Foundation takes care of this. Then we went down the street to the Country Music Hall of Fame, which, man, oh my God, it's crazy. And my new hips gave out on me, so partway through, I had to go downstairs and sit down. Then we go back to the hotel and hospitality room, and I'm sitting there all by myself, because at that point I didn't really know anybody. And then one of my buddies, Vern Ward, who's been on the Budcast before, and he was with me when I got shot the first time. He and his wife got there, and so we got reacquainted after 54 years. And it's when you develop these bonds with these guys that you actually served with, even if it's been 54 years, it's kind of like, oh, I just saw him last week, and so we got to spend a lot of time. I met a more modern SF guy who's medically retired and his 2 teenage sons. And every year now when I go, I spend an evening with them. And the next day, oh my God. So they load us up in the vans, take us to Fort Campbell, and they have one of the ODAs outside, set up outside their team room with a lot of their gear, their vehicles, the drones. They're showing us this drone that's literally, it's so small you can hold it in your palm of your hand. It's black, and they can control it with a cell phone. Now, it's not your cell phone, it's a special cell phone, but that's how small it is, and they control this thing. So they can go to like a village or whatever that they're getting ready to hit. They can send that drone up, that little bitty drone, and it's got this super, super high definition camera. They can see what's going on in the compound, bring the drone back, and then they can go do their thing, and they've at least got a good idea. Do they have a bunch of bad guys milling around or what? And then their vehicles are Polaris, probably specially built, but otherwise severely built, like side by sides and that. 2 seat, there's a front seat and a back seat, and each door on the back seat has a automatic weapon mounted to it on a swivel. And then they showed a electric motorcycle. So it's like, okay, how far can this thing go on this little battery? And they said, oh, about 30 miles. And I said, well, how do you go on a mission? You got to drive out. It may be 2 hours to get to this village that you're going to attack or whatever. So, oh, well, there's a bracket here on the back. And we mount the motorcycle on there. We get to where we're going to hide out. And then our scout can take that motorcycle. It makes absolutely no noise at all. Take the motorcycle and get further in and get a lot closer and see what they can see. Then it comes back. We put it back on the vehicle, and we don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about the noise and all that. Then after we got to go in the team room and see all the gear and all that. And it was kind of crowded because all the families and everything. And, I wanted to talk one-on-one with the team sergeant, but I wasn't able to do that because couldn't get everybody to clear out, So then they load us in the vans and take us out to the range. The indoor range was being rebuilt or whatever. And so we go to this range, and they've got all these weapons lined up on this outdoor range, and the families, the kids are getting to shoot all these weapons. So they had 3 different pistols, an M4, an AK-47, and 3 sniper rifles, and you can shoot every one of them. You just got to wait in line. And like the pistols, I've got so many guns, I wasn't worried about them, but I did the M4 and the AK, and then the sniper rifles, including a Barrett 50. Oh my God, I'm telling you, Jesus. So, so I call home that night and I tell the boss what I did. And she says, so the families can shoot the sniper rifles? And I said, yeah. She says, I'm going next year. So then on Friday, we went to they call it the Hall of Heroes. And it's this long, narrow hall, literally. And it's got displays from all the different major campaigns that 5th Group has been involved in. Like there's one on Somalia. There's that. Well, this is when they dedicated the display for SOG with the statues and modeled after certain people. There's a picture of it. Recently, and I got to tell you, it pissed me off. The one over on the far left, some SOG reenactor made comments about how inaccurate the equipment was. Well, I got news for him. All that equipment came from SOG guys, and it was arranged by SOG guys. So who knows better, SOG guys or a reenactor? I'm sorry, but that really pissed me off. So all this equipment, it's the real deal. The screen that you see in the middle, there's a game. What's it called, Bud? Arma 3?
Mm-hmm. Yep.
Something like that. And the graphics and everything are so realistic. And, they got everything, picking up a team under fire, putting a team in, all kinds of stuff. And I'm working on getting them a copy that I have of 4 different extractions under fire. I converted some, what do you call them? Cassette tapes, if anybody knows what those are anymore. I converted those from cassette tapes to CDs for the Special Operations Association, and I have a copy of them. It would be really cool to incorporate real missions under fire into that video. Go ahead, bud.
Oh, no, I was saying that would be very cool to have that real audio in there on the game.
Yeah. So then they dedicated, the thing, and then the colonel, the group commander at that time, was standing next to me, and he slipped me one of his challenge coins, and then he asked me to talk about what is a prairie fire emergency. He said he was getting a lot of questions about that people didn't understand what was a prairie fire. So, knowing me, I don't have any problem talking to groups, so I did that. So then that night, Well, then during that day too, they had a camera crew that interviewed me for about an hour, which was kind of cool. And then a public affairs gal, she interviewed me and said, "Can I contact you later to write a big article?" And I never heard from her, but sometimes that's the way it goes. And then Friday night was the banquet, and it was funny. Thursday night, I'm sitting in the hospitality room again by myself, and this tall guy comes and sits down. "Can I sit down with you?" And GS, "I'm still waiting on your phone call, dude. We can get together sometime." Um, um, okay. He says, "Do you mind talking about SOG?" And I said, "No." So we start talking, and then this other guy comes down and sits next to me, and he doesn't say anything. He just, "Can I join you?" "Yeah, have a seat." So finally, I asked the first guy, I said, "So what is your job?" And this is just another one of those little humorous stories, funny to me anyway. "What is your job here?" And he says, "Well, I'm the command sergeant major of 4th Battalion." "Oh, nice to know you." I said, "So who's the little guy next to me? Is that your driver?" And the guy busts out laughing, and he said, "No, I'm the 5th Group Commander, Colonel Lindemann." Okay. Yeah, me and my big mouth. He said, "Oh, I get those comments all the time because I look so young." And it was funnier than hell. But anyway, 2 nights in a row, Thursday night, they kept me up till midnight, from 8 o'clock until midnight, talking SOG. And then Friday night after the banquet, I'm sitting there in the hospitality room. It's about 9 o'clock. And here they come again. And we're up till midnight again. And I'm like, "Guys, I'm leaving at about 5:30 in the morning. I got to get some sleep." So at midnight, I woofed out on them, and you know, and then that was the end of it for me. And I made my 7-hour drive back home. But my wife is like, "Remember, I'm going with you next year because I'm going to shoot that sniper rifle." So cool. And so 23, she went with me, and we did all the trip to Nashville. The trip in Nashville on 23 was, where'd we go? Country Music Songwriters Hall of Fame. And then we had lunch at Kid Rock's bar. Then we go back, and sit in the hospitality room and visit with people that I've met. So this year, when I went, this was kind of like what do you call it? The crowning glory. Oh, well, so last year, my wife got to shoot the sniper rifle. That's all she cared about. She got to shoot the sniper rifle, and I got pictures. And one of the pictures I did is a video, and when she fires, you can actually see the bullet coming out the barrel of the sniper rifle. It's just cool as hell. So I'm going to get that picture blown up and, give it to her probably at Christmas time. So this year I went, she didn't go. I had it arranged. The ones of you that listen often, my buddy who was my roommate for a period of time at SOG, John Holland, we've been in constant contact ever since we reconnected. And Terry Minahan, who lives up outside of, where does he live? Portland or somewhere up in Oregon, lives up in the mountains. And young Bud was supposed to be my guest, but with his mom's problems, he ghosted me. Minahan ghosted me, and John had a work situation where he couldn't come. So none of them showed up but me. So that freed me up to do some wheeling and dealing. So I spent my Tuesday night with this guy and his two sons. Wednesday night I spent with a few guys. And 2 years ago, I also met Greg Dink Jordan, who actually became one of the command sergeant majors of 5th Group. And I did the trip to Nashville. What did we do? Oh, and this shows you how things can go sideways. One of the wives who went on the trip 2 years ago, she bitched that, oh, every year you go to some museum or something. So this year they said, well, you know what? We'll fix your ass. So this year we're not going to a museum. They took us to John Rich's bar, which is called, I forget. I got pictures of it. And we just went up in the bar from 11 o'clock to 3 o'clock and sat in the bar and ate lunch and, just visited. Then we go back to the hotel. But again, the banquet, this banquet is like, there's probably 500 people at the banquet. And current SF guys, us old timers, in betweeners, and all that. But sitting visiting. So the one night I'm sitting in there again, and believe it or not, I'm not real social from the standpoint of just going up to people and introducing myself and all that. If you come to me, I'm going to welcome you, sit down, and we'll sit there all night if you want. But I don't do it, the opposite way. So this young guy comes up, can I sit down? And, he says, I see from your shirt, I see you were in SOG. And I said, yeah. So we start talking, and I said, so what do you do? And he says, he's a captain and he's a helicopter pilot. And he said, I've only been in 5th Group for 2 months. I came from the 101st, the Pukin Chickens. And my job is in 1st Battalion is to coordinate the aircraft for training missions and stuff like that. So I do that, but he said, I've been a pilot. I've been in for 15 years. So we start talking about, I don't know why I'm so fixated on it, but when they kicked me out because of my medical problems in 1972, that was before the Blackhawks ever came. That was like 7 years before the Blackhawks came online. And I just told him, I said, I'm always interested in the differences between a Huey and a Blackhawk. And I said, I've never even been near a Blackhawk, so I have no clue. And he's like, his eyes brighten up and he's like, what are you doing Friday afternoon? I said, well, I'll be at the Hall of Heroes. And he said, okay, I'll pick you up and we're going to go for a little ride. And I'm like, right away, I knew what was going on. So he comes and picks me up. We go out to the airfield and there's all these choppers. We see this one chopper that's practicing just up and down. And we go to a hangar and go in there, and it's the hangar for the medevac choppers. And we're looking around, and he's like, well, get in. I said, so I start to climb in the back, and he says, no, get up in the pilot's seat. And I'm like, you got to be kidding me. You're going to let me do that? So I had to become a contortionist. That's why I think the pilots are all smaller frame guys, because a big guy like me play hell getting in and out of the pilot's seat on one of these choppers. And it's like being packed in a can of sardines or something. So I'm in there and I'm looking at all the stuff on all the controls and stuff, and he's explaining a lot of them to me and all that. And then I get out of that, and we're standing there, and these three guys come walking up, and so one of them I see is a major, and one of them's a first sergeant, and one's a warrant officer. So my friend, and I'm not going to name his name only because he probably wouldn't have a problem with it, but I don't want to put him on the hook for anything. And he said, I've got this SOG guy that's interested in the differences between Hueys and Blackhawks. And these guys' eyes light up. And again, they look at my shirt and they see SOG. And then, oh, you were in SOG? Yeah. And the major especially was really interested. So he wanted to talk about SOG. So we start talking about the choppers and the differences and all that. And me being nosy, I said, okay, you're a major, so what is your function here? And he's like, well, I'm the squadron commander of the medevac unit. And he said, hang on just a minute. He asked the other two guys, he says, do you have one of my coins? And they said, no. He said, I'll be right back. And I don't know how well these are going to show up by me holding them up. I'll try. So he comes back, and so there's his challenge coin. And then he gives me their unit patch. And for those who don't know, challenge coins, back in my day, I never even heard of a challenge coin. But this one is pretty cool. It says dust off when I have your wounded. And it's got a major and a first sergeant's emblems on it. And then the front side's got that eagle and all that. Anyway, that was pretty cool. And we talked for probably a half hour or so about these differences in the aircrafts. So then they were getting off. Apparently, the commanding general of the 101st lets everybody off at 3:00 on Friday afternoons, and we were there. It was 4:00. So these guys just wanted to get home. And so they went on their way. So then we go outside, and we got a Chinook that was landing. And then we've got all the Blackhawks, and way off in the distance, I can see some of the special secret choppers from the 160th SOS. And of course, those guys are so secret, even with my background, they wouldn't even let me get near their compound. You know, it's like, nah, this is classified stuff. And I said, well, I think I've been exposed to some classified stuff. Yeah, well, we don't give tours, which is not true, but that's what they're telling me. So anyway, next year, all I can say at this point is, if Bud doesn't ghost me next year, get his mom all fixed up so he can leave her for a week. And my two buddies, John Holland and Minahan, if they come, there's going to be a special surprise that afternoon. So that's all I'm going to say. They have a picnic on Saturday on Gabriel Field, which is on the other side of the Hall of Heroes. And one of the things that's in the process right now, that it's still in the fundraising stage, but I think they've raised almost enough money. They're going to build a monument and list all 800 and some names of the Special Forces guys who were killed in Vietnam. And so it's a monument that'll be dedicated just to the Vietnam era Special Forces guys. I know I donated my money, and it's a good cause. And, I can't wait. There's what the monument will look like. And they have monuments already to other time periods, but this one will be, believe it or not, there's 800 and some names on there. And it's one of those things, kind of like going to the wall in Washington. I've been there a million times. I don't do well at it because there's too many names on there that are familiar. This is going to be the same way. I just don't do well with these things, but I wanted to support it. And so anyway, I came home on Saturday morning. This year, I didn't go to the picnic. My wife and I went last year. All I can say is, when they do these activities, and on Friday afternoons, the thing in the Hall of Heroes, they call it the old and new mixer. And it's supposed to be the old guys and the young guys getting together and visiting with each other. But unfortunately, what really happens is the old guys end up hanging together and the young guys end up hanging together because that's who they know. And I told them, I said, next year you need to make signs for us to hang on us and says, us old guys don't bite or something, to try to get these guys to talk to us. One of the things that I'm also working on, and I had a meeting set up with the group commander, but we had to cancel it because Bud wasn't there. Bud, I'm trying to make you feel bad, Bud, but you got to take care of Mama first. All the interviews that Bud has done, which the SOG interviews, I'm guessing maybe 75?
I think it's upwards of 100 now.
Okay.
Yeah.
All those interviews, the goal is for all of those interviews to be made available to the guys in 5th group where they can watch them whenever they want. So it's a really cool thing. And I met a captain who was supposed to put me in touch with the right person to make that happen, but it's been a month and I ain't heard anything yet. So I got to be patient. But, at my age, patience kind of wears thin because they ain't got a lot of time. And, but that'll be pretty cool. So that's really about it for the reunion. I mean, the cool thing about the reunion is sitting there by myself and having guys come up and ask to sit down and they want to talk about SOG. And, it doesn't get any cooler than that because they've all learned about SOG. And I learned a little bit more about that, how they learn about SOG in training in, what do they call that now? The Q course. Mm-hmm. We just called it training group. But I'm going to make it happen between Bud and I. It's going to happen. It's one of them things of getting a hold of the right person at the right time and all that. So, I guess we're at that point. Is there any questions about the reunion, which kind of a dry subject, but it was a cool experience, and I'll be going every year from now on, as long as I'm able to.
I don't
see any questions.
See any on the questions for that. There was
comments, but not really questions.
There was a SOG question though, by Mike Bravo here.
Okay, what do we got here? Can you describe in detail what a SOG mission debrief AAR will be like? How many people are in the room? What kind of questions? GS, if you're invited by some guy like me, you can come. It's that simple. That's why Bud was going to be able to come, because I invited him. Um, so we'll talk later, and SOAR is also invite only. Something about trees and plants. Oh, James Porter, come on, man. I'm not a botanist. Okay, let's talk about this first. So a debrief. The main people that would be in the debrief would be the S2 and S3 people, obviously, because they're basically in charge of planning future missions. So they need to learn everything in as much detail as possible about what you observed. Um, 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 Things like, okay, what was the terrain like? What were the plants like? Which kind of gets into James's question. Um, the only plant that I can describe besides bamboo would be elephant grass, and it was everywhere. The problem with elephant grass is it would cut the hell out of you. As you go through elephant grass, it's got all these little, I call them spiny spines or something, and you go through and it'll cut your clothes, it'll cut your skin. And of course, over there with the heat and all that, you got to worry about infection. If you start bleeding or something, you got to worry about stuff like that. They want to know, for instance, if you were on a road watch, they want to know, okay, what times a day was there vehicle traffic? What times a day was there just troop traffic? What kind of, and I guess this is something in a little bit I'll go into, because this, again, the subject keeps coming up about, and I've been asked to write up something for another person that does podcasts about the trail. Um, um, were there any, like, where the road would cross a river? Could you tell if there was an underwater bridge? Because the North Vietnamese were really good at building underwater bridges, so that when the aircraft flew over, okay, you see the road goes in and the road comes out. If the bridge got blown up, then that's work for them. They got to rebuild the bridge. So they want to know all those kind of things. Did you have trackers? What kind of trackers? In other words, were they clacking a couple of bamboo sticks? Were they firing a signal shot every so often? Did they have dogs?
How well fed they were? What kind of weapons? Did they have fresh haircuts?
Uniforms and haircuts told a lot about the troops that you were observing. If you see troops that have freshly cut hair, clean uniforms and all that, then they're fresh troops. Mm-hmm. If the guys look like raggedy ass ragamuffins, they've been there for a long time. So more than likely, those are guards along the trail. Mm-hmm. And from what I've read, these guards would cover about a 15-mile section of the trail, and they just go back and forth up and down their segment of the trail. But all these things in an after action report would go into planning if there was enough interest in what am I trying to say? In a future mission. For instance, a recon team observes what looks to be like a regimental bivouac area or a division or whatever. Well, you're probably not going to send another recon team in there. You're going to send my hatchet force in there for us to go in and do some serious damage, or to recon it in more detail. but at least having enough people that if we get in deep stuff, you can at least hold off till they can blow them to pieces. So you'd have your S2, S3. Very rarely, but occasionally, you would have the backseat Covey rider in there. Because what he sees, and this is one of the things I'm hung up on, is what the Covey rider sees from the air is not always identical to what we would see on the ground. So you need both of those perspectives. And then, of course, you'd have your team leader and maybe a couple other members of the team. And all the information from all those different people would get put together for the future. Just like when I got, and I hate to keep phrasing it that way, but when I got shot the first time, a recon team had found this. They thought it was a truck stop or whatever. It turned out to be a truck refueling station, which is even more critical. And it was too much for the recon team to handle, so they sent us in as a hatchet force. And it ended up, it was a truck refueling station. There were several hundred 55-gallon Shell Oil Company drums stacked up, empty, and then there was the full ones. So that's how they planned. The recon team did their after action report, and then they decided, okay, you guys are going in and get rid of it. So, and sometimes it would be a decision. Maybe the team got into something and got shot out, and they decided it was worth trying to send another recon team in. Again, it was all based on that after action report and how much information was provided, and if there was any things missing, it might be worth trying another recon team. So I hope that answers your question on after action reports. Okay, guys, what do we want to talk about? Because it's only been 53 minutes.
Coming up on 58.
I'm in a mood for talking today, so let's talk. It's been too long of a dry spell. Let's talk about the trail again. And Bud, okay, here a different TTP training tactic based on the differences. Can you put that one up on the screen? Okay.
For that, you may want to look up our super in depth. Ed Walkoff has done about 5 episodes with us, to where he literally talks from getting a mission packet to when they get off the helicopters and are debriefing with everyone in the team. So if you type in Ed Walkoff and Reconcast, you'll get an RT perspective from RT New York. But Terry has his own outlook and way of going through training with his hatchet forces.
And again, you have to keep in mind that I was in the hatchet force the entire time. I was never on recon. So the way the recon teams trained and the way the hatchet force trained, in some ways were very similar, and in some ways were totally different. One of the things that was probably virtually identical, except for numbers, was the immediate action drills. And that was one of the things that in hatchet force was the most often trained things that we did, because I guess you could look at it, we got strength, safety, and strength in numbers. And so the immediate action drill was the most important thing, because there's no way you can keep 105 guys silent in the jungle. And so the bad guys know where you're at. They're going to be trying to set up ambushes and that. So the immediate action drills were our number one most important thing, because you almost it's almost a given you're going to walk into an ambush. And all you can do is try to train for it, how you're going to react, what you're going to do. And so that was our big thing. Um, um, and so we didn't train, like, for instance, coming out on ropes. We didn't train on coming out of ropes. I came out one time, but we talked about it, and so we kind of knew what to do. We all carried a carabiner and a rope, 30, was it 20-foot rope, hanging from our gear. But with the hatchet force, the only reason I came out on the strings that time was I was going to be in the last load out, and because of the ground fire and all that, and we kind of shifted our LZ a little bit because of all the bad guys. And so the chopper felt that it was going to be safer for them to drop the ropes. So we went out on ropes the one time. But normally, hatchet force, you went out on choppers. And it was a mix of Hueys and the King Bees. Recon teams, a whole different story. I don't know the percentage of times they came out on strings, but there was a lot of coming out on strings. And I can only speak for the one time that I did it. It may be 110, 120 degrees down there on the ground, but when you get up at 3,000 feet, it's in the 30s, maybe even the 20s. And it would be nothing for these guys to get back where they can set them down. Usually it was at Ben Het, because that was just across the border and more secure. They could set them down, and then you'd get into the chopper and you'd be frozen, Okay, let's see. What was the biggest eye-opener surprise that you didn't expect when you ran your first mission? Yeah. Again, my perspective, when I first got to training group in January of 68, and I tested out, I grew up with guns, so my thing was I wanted to be a weapons guy, get to play with all the different weapons from around the world and all that. So I started training group the last week in January of 68, and I graduated from training group at the end of August of 68, went home on leave for 30 days and went to Vietnam. All of our training, because SOG was so secret and nobody would talk about it, all of our training had to do with being on an A-team, winning the hearts and minds of the people, and the medics doing what they call the med caps in the villages, that kind of stuff. So it was all geared towards being on an A-team. Well, once you get to Nam and you volunteer for some secret thing that you don't know anything about, it's all going to be OJT after that. And I got assigned to Kontum in the Central Highlands. So everything I did, we went into Cambodia one time to help CCS out. But all the missions I did were within Laos, down in the southern part of Laos and approaching the Cambodian border. Never went down in the Delta. One time we were supposed to go into the DMZ to help out CCN. Well, after we did the mission brief and they said within 30 minutes you could be in contact with 10,000 troops, we were so glad that they scrubbed that mission, because what the hell, 105 guys against 10,000, whatever. No, thank you. So on that first mission, it just happened to be a SLAM. Search, locate, annihilate. We called it mutilate, but it's supposed to stand for monitor. Well, how the hell does 105 guys monitor anything without being discovered? but it was an acronym that they came up with. So we go in, and this was apparently a big slam. They sent us in what we later learned was the regimental base area for the 66th NVA Regiment, which had torn up the 173rd Airborne Division a year and a half earlier, outside of Dak To. So we get in there, and my company was in the if you want to call it the point or the lead, you know. So we're going across this mountain. Again, the map sucked. It said one mountain. It turned out to be three mountains up and down because from the air you couldn't tell with the triple canopy. So I'm up in the point. Now, this is my very first mission. I'm up in the point element. We get down at the bottom of this mountain, and there's pretty nice clear water running. So we fill our canteens. Well, now it's time to go up the next mountain. A little surprise waiting for us. There's steps cut into the side of the mountain all the way up to the top. So right away, you know what's going on. A little company or a platoon doesn't cut steps into the side of a mountain. So you know you're in, and they never told us that this was a base camp area or believed to be camp for the 66th Regiment. So we get to the top, and there were 7 of us. There was my company commander, Ronald Goulet, KIA, Lieutenant Jim Jerson, KIA, later on, and myself, my interpreter, and 3 other yards. And according to the map, once we go down the other side of the mountain, there was a big open area, and we wanted to get across that open area and up to the high ground before nightfall. So being young and stupid and being on my first mission, I'm like, why don't I take my gear off and I'll climb this tree and see if I can see out over the triple canopy jungle and see if I can see that open area and make sure it's really there. As soon as I unbuckled my pistol belt, we got hit with what I believe to be a rifle grenade, but we don't know for sure. It could have been an RPG or something. It killed the 3 yards. Goulet and Jerson were pinned down. Myself and my interpreter were pinned down, and my rucksack had a nice, neat row of bullet holes across it, so that just missed my head. Well, and this kind of goes back, and I don't want to make it sound like I was like Rambo or something, because I wasn't. It's like more a self-preservation thing. So it's like I grew up playing cowboys and Indians and war and all that. So it's where logic kicks in and says, okay, we're pinned down. We don't know by how many people, but there's a lot of fire coming on us. What can I do? So I crawled over to the top of the hill, and it could have been a grenade, it could have been a rifle grenade, I don't know, went off on the guys still coming up the hill. So they had a bunch of wounded, but one of the guys at the very top of the hill at the crest was one of our yards who had an M79. So I said, give me the M79 and give me a bandolier of ammo. And it was the HE rounds, which have to go 15 yards to arm themselves. So I crawl back up, and they're still just pouring heavy fire on us. So it's like, okay, what am I going to do with this thing now? I can't fire directly at them because it's got to go 15 yards. And if it doesn't, we're liable to get hit with shrapnel. So I had this brilliant idea, being a highly trained Special Forces weapons guy. I'm going to use that M79 like a mortar. And so I put it straight up, and then I angled it just a tiny bit. I wanted it to go off about 20 to 30 yards in front of us. So I started lobbing rounds, and they were going off exactly where I wanted. And pretty soon it got quiet. Okay, so it's quiet now. So we get up, and it turns out the bad guys were no longer with us. They were all dead. So whatever. So then we set up a perimeter. We're on this mountaintop. Well, how in the hell are the choppers? Because we got dead, we got wounded. How are the choppers going to get us out? Well, that began my learning process with explosives. Oh man, I love playing with this stuff. Det cord and C4. So the bigger trees we blew with det cord and C4, but then you still got them trees laying there, and to try to load a body or a wounded on a chopper ain't going to happen very easily. So they sent a King Bee in, and they dropped us a chainsaw and some gas and oil and all that stuff. So we spent the rest of the day cutting up trees and clearing this LZ just big enough for choppers to get into. And the next morning, again, my first mission, I got indoctrinated into Green Hornets, which were basically speed. They were amphetamines to keep you awake. And I never slept a wink that night, because it's like, hell, you can hear them pulling up down at the bottom of the hill. You hear the trucks pulling up. You hear the tailgates dropping. So you know at some point we're going to get our asses kicked big time. So next morning, choppers come in. They get us all out after they worked a lot of airstrikes all around us. And we get back to camp, and Goulet comes, and him and Jerson called me in and said, we're writing you up for a Silver Star for what you did. And I'm like, no. I just did what I did. I mean, it's, I'm not looking for medals. And looking back on it, yeah, it would have been nice to have a Silver Star on my resume or whatever, but I honestly was not there to collect medals. It was one of those things you do. And a lot of people have asked questions that kind of lead into this on other podcasts is, how do you know if a person is going to work out, in these situations? And then the best answer I can give is, until the first shot gets fired, you don't know how anybody's going to work out. Apparently I worked out okay, but yes, we did have people who did not work out okay. And if you had a person like that, as soon as you got back and reported that, literally within hours, that person would be gone, never to be heard of again. They'd ship them off maybe to an A camp or a Mike Force or something like that. And they might have done very well in a situation like that. But for what we were doing, nah, you can't have somebody like that, because you could end up dead. It's that simple. So looking back on it, yeah, I should have let them go ahead and give me that Silver Star, but honestly, I could care less today. I'm 76 years old, and it wouldn't get me a cup of coffee, So that was my first experience. What I took away from it was, we made a major mistake. When we got up on top of that hill, they were already waiting for us. But if we had put, whatever you want to call it, sentries, flankers, whatever, we might have lost a couple of guys, but at the same time, we might have also triggered the ambush early, and we may have been able to overcome it without taking serious casualties. So it was a lax moment on our part. Hey, Ed, another one of my buddies. So, when you get back, and after the debrief and your downtime and all that, and you get back to training, you concentrate on the things that went wrong. Okay, what can we do for the next time? And And again, the immediate action drills and just the importance of a lot of times having, especially if you're in a situation, and we didn't know it until everything was over with, that we walked up on a major trail. Of course, because we're in a regimental base camp area, they got trails everywhere. But if you're in an area, for instance, where there was a trail, maybe you're going to follow that trail for a short distance or a long distance, whatever. You got to have flankers out on both sides of that trail, because if you don't, and they need to be further ahead of you, kind of like point men, because if they walk up and trigger the ambush that's probably waiting for you, again, you've got time to react. You do your immediate action drills. Something that we learned, if especially at night, we would go down and set up ambushes on the trail. And as soon as I get done with this story, we're going to talk about the trail. What was it really? One of the things we learned is, if you trigger an ambush, and let's say it's all troops on a trail, you trigger the ambush, the first thing those troops are going to do is head for the ditches on the side of the road, on the opposite side from where you're shooting from. Well, if you've got a really good ambush set up, you're going to be covering both sides of that trail. So we learned that what you do in that kind of situation where there is a ditch where somebody could maybe take cover is place some claymores strategically to cover the length of that ditch. So these guys all jump into a ditch thinking that they're protected, and you set off the claymore. Ain't nobody in the ditch anymore, you know? But those are the little things that you learn as you go along of what to do, in this case on an ambush. Okay, you know that instinctively anybody with any common sense is going to go for the ditch. So what do? You take out the guys in the ditch. We were really, we concentrated a lot on L-shaped ambushes, and there was a variety of different reasons for them. You could get the front guys, the rear guys, so you don't have anybody running away to get help. The one problem with that is, I don't care how careful you are, how you plan it. Okay, so you got a bunch of guys diddy bopping along this trail, and now maybe you can tell they got their rifles slung instead of carrying them at port arms. If they got their rifle slings, they're not expecting you. And that's good. But okay, you get a platoon, 20 or 30 guys come into sight. So you're going to ambush these 20 or 30 guys and hopefully get at least one prisoner out of it. What you don't know is, down around the curve, there could be a whole company, there could be a regiment, you don't know. So a lot of times you trigger this ambush thinking, all you got is 30 guys, and it ends up being a ton of guys. Okay, Mike Bravo, yes. And this is kind of what I'm talking about. A recon team would normally not walk the trail, but if they found a trail, they might set up an ambush hoping to get like a couple of guys diddy bopping along and take one prisoner. With the hatchet force, because again, I use the term strength in numbers. I mean, there were a number of times when we did actually walk either the road or the trail. Sometimes for a little bit longer distance, sometimes for a shorter distance. but we never walked it for like a click or two or something like that. You'd walk it for a short distance, you'd get off of it, you'd sit and listen, you'd put your flankers out, which they're already out, but you'd put them out further in the direction you're moving just in case, because you know the bad guys know you're there. And if they've got an ambush set up, those flankers could trigger the ambush. So yeah, it wasn't the smartest thing to do, but sometimes it was done as an expedient to move us along closer to what our objective was. And, you know, if you do make contact, it's not likely you're going to make contact immediately with a whole regiment or division or whatever. It might be a company, might only be a platoon, something like that. So with the hatchet force, we were willing to take the risk sometimes, but not all the time. You know, but the recon teams, that would have been almost a folly to walk the trail, to actually walk the trail itself. Now, I know there's some examples where a team would walk the trail just for a short distance, and that was usually to put some distance between them and the trackers. But then they would get off the trail, try to set up an ambush and all that. So yeah, sometimes we did things that were, you got to keep in mind the numbers game. It wasn't the smartest thing to do, but yet we did it. So, but a recon team, not recommended. Okay, guys, I'm in a talking mood today. So let's see. Do you have any stories about birds? Not really. Not birds. I mean, there were birds. There was a lot of birds. If there were no birds, you better be expecting that you're getting ready to get ambushed or make contact. Because, you know, it's just like today, you go hunting, all the birds fly away. Well, that's because you've scared the birds away. What does that tell you? That tells you something's in the area. So, but from a noise perspective or a sound, I never really identified with any specific bird, but there was a lizard. Oh, Mary Jo, I'm sorry, but it was called a fuck you lizard because that's exactly what it sounded like it was saying. And it sounded like a human voice. And I never saw the actual lizard, but boy, you could hear them. And they would make that sound. And it really put you on high alert because it did sound like a human voice. And it was crazy. Let's see. Well, yeah, the whole thing with the mold, and I know I've told this story before, but we've got a lot of new listeners. In I'm going to say roughly spring to summer of '69. This one particular instance, I think, puts it in perspective. So we get, you do your briefing. Okay, here's your map. Every American's got a map. This is where you're getting put in. So this is the official, this is where you're going in. The mole in Saigon knows exactly where you're going to get put in. He tells his people, it goes to the Russians through the Walker spy ring. That goes to Russia. Russia tells North Vietnam, and they're waiting on the LZ for you to come in. And that's how we lost a lot of guys. So we go in on this mission, and, of course, again, it's a hatchet force, so there's a lot of us. So we go in and we get on the ground. We don't make contact, which is wonderful. But then we're sitting there looking at the map. Covey's flying over, for like 10 or 15 minutes to make sure we get off the LZ and we're safe and all that. And we're not in contact. And we know in our mind, okay, why haven't we been hit? Because they know where we're at. It's pretty obvious. Every time you go in, they're waiting on you. It's pretty obvious. Something ain't right. And we're looking at the terrain and we're looking at the map, and it's like, these two aren't in agreement. We're not where we were supposed to be. So you call, and in this case, it was Ronald Goulet, Captain Goulet. Um, um, so he calls up to Covey and he's like, where the hell are we? Because we're not where we were told we were. Covey's like, just a minute, I'll be right back with you. Blah, blah, blah. So we wait a couple minutes. Covey flies over. We signal him with the mirror. He says, okay, here's your coordinates. This is where you're really at. Well, why are we not where we were supposed to be? Well, in our minds, we're thinking that our S3 is just a complete, totally incompetent fool. And it turns out that he was trying to save our lives by putting us in on an alternate LZ so we wouldn't get in heavy contact. So we gradually, as we learned that, we came to expect that. And we in the what do you call them, the pre-mission briefings, there was always a Vietnamese in there, so you never knew. We didn't trust them, period. I don't care who they were, we didn't trust them. And so you never knew, okay, is this guy going to run back and give it away, or are we okay? So again, this idea of going into an alternate LZ made all the sense in the world, and I have no doubt in my mind that it saved a lot of lives. So, what do we got here? Let's see. Okay, so let's talk about the trail. And I just wrote up this full page thing about the trail. I think I called it the Enigma Called the Trail or whatever, and it'll be on another podcast in the future or in a book. When we talk about the trail, the word trail itself kind of denotes a footpath, a trail, like a game trail or something you'd find out in the woods. Whenever I go back in my woods, there's all kinds of deer trails and whatever. In reality, the trail was a bunch of different things depending on where you were, what your perspective was. And Bud's got all my pictures of the trail from different perspectives. Like when we took out that refueling station, I've got some really good pictures standing on the trail showing what it looked like. And there's one particular picture, Bud, you know the one I'm talking about, where you can see not only the road, but a high-speed trail and what I'd call a low-speed trail, all three in the same picture. It's that one in the mountains with all the bomb craters around it and all that.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
If you can pull it up, that would be maybe a good one. And then maybe the picture of from the road itself. But the road where the vehicles ran on, it's what I call a high-speed trail. I mean, we called it a trail, but it's really a road. It was maintained by bulldozers and other heavy equipment, road graders, whatever. And that's where they ran all their truck traffic down. And those trucks are loaded to the gills with, weight-wise with equipment. Then you have I call them high-speed trails, which it might be 5 foot wide, it might be 10 foot wide in places, but this is where you might run. And usually these trails were very close, parallel to a road. And this is where you might run a company or a battalion or whatever, large numbers of troops where they can go like 4 abreast or something. And so that's why we call it a high-speed trail, and they can move quickly. Then, and most frequently, you would find these, if you want to call them a low-speed trail, almost a game trail, it would be like maybe 3 or 4 guys at a time, single file. And a lot of those ran along the ridge tops and then down into the valley and back up onto the next ridge top and that. And a lot of that was, those trails would a lot of times lead into bivouac areas for a larger number of troops, but they weren't for moving those large number of troops, you know. So let's see. Are you going to show the pictures, bud?
I'm trying to get my jump drive to be accepted in. I've got my microphone and headphones plugged in, and it's...
Well, we'll move on. When you get them, we can put them up. So generally speaking, there was a lot more interest by higher headquarters on the roads because, okay, we want to know what kind of vehicles, how many vehicles, are they very heavily loaded down? Do they appear to lightly loaded down? Are they hauling troops or are they hauling supplies? So more often than not, the recon teams would set up on a hill where they had a clear view of the road and they could see all these things that were important to people back, you know, in Saigon or wherever. Then Hatchet Forest, when we'd go in, we'd see some of these other trails because we would be not walking on the road itself, but generally our targets would be more in line with the actual roads because it was always a plan. It was always a goal to try to get a prisoner. And if we could get a live truck driver, this guy's coming from somewhere further up north, and he is going to have probably more information for us that's of value than catching like say a sentry at a truck stop, because that guy's pretty much staying within a few miles of where he's at. So he's only going to know what's going on in his little area. But these truck drivers are coming all the way from up north. They're probably switching off at some way station, new driver, and then they keep shuffling back and forth. But that's why the goal was almost always get a truck driver. You know, that would be one of our best sources of information. And then there's stories of recon teams on these high-speed trails. I forget who it was. Bud will probably remember. It was they killed, I think, 3 guys, and one of them turned out to be a high-ranking North Vietnamese guy that had all kinds of plans and stuff in his satchel, and it provided all kinds of information for the intelligence folks. So that's kind of in a nutshell. When we use the term trail, you have to put it in perspective for what we're talking about. Most of the pictures I have are more from the actual trail, the road, more than the trails. But I've got one picture where in one picture you see the road and maybe 15, 20 yards off to the side of the road, you see the high-speed trail. And then up on the ridgetop coming down, you see what I call a low-speed trail. So let's see. Well, okay, that's the road. Questions. This is one of them days. It's kind of free form. I mean, I covered that book. For people that are really interested in did we leave prisoners behind, there is absolutely no question in my mind. And it was all political. And every one of them politicians ought to be hung out to dry. You know, they ought to be ashamed of themselves. But that's what happens in politics. You know, us guys on the ground's a whole different story. While Bud's trying to get the jump drive up. In the summer of 1971, I was at Fort Bragg, and every month, the city of Miami Beach, Florida, would bring a plane load of guys from Fort Bragg, and to get invited on this thing, you had to have Purple Hearts, so I didn't have any problem qualifying for that. But they would fly us down to Miami Beach. They'd meet us at the airport. They'd have a big reception, and we would spend, I'm trying to remember, I think it was, I don't know, maybe 4 days or something. They treated us like kings. Went to these fancy nightclubs and all this other stuff. They provided, let's see, companions for us while we were there. And it was a well done thing. So I've got this great big parchment scroll, city of Miami Beach, Florida, blah, 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 key to the city, you know, and all this good stuff. And the one night they took us to dinner at the Sheraton Biscayne Hotel. And whose favorite restaurant was that? Old Tricky Dick Nixon. So guess who comes strolling in with all his bodyguards? And that was old Tricky Dick. And he just kind of waved to us, but he wasn't going to be bothered talking to us. He was, you know, he's too far above us. So, you know, but it was an awesome experience. I say unfortunately because this could have really turned into a big disaster. One of the guys that I met there, he was an SF Vietnam guy. We got to know each other a little bit, and God, it was a year or two later when most people have heard about this Bo Greitz going to make this POW rescue mission, and the CIA was involved in it. And then at the last minute, they withdrew their support, and it could have really gone, well, it did go sideways. Well, I got a letter from this guy that I had met down there in Miami Beach. Came to the house, I read it. Well, my ex-wife found the letter, and she read it, and well, there's a special thing going on, and your job will be taken care of. All this stuff will be, you know, your pay-wise, it'll be a lucrative thing, blah, blah, blah. As it turned out, it was this Bo Greitz thing that was doomed to failure from the start anyway. And thank God I never responded to the letter, because then I would have got drawn into this nonsense. But as strongly as I believe that some of my friends included were left behind, the temptation to do something like that, it would never work out. It would never work out. So MJ's got a question here. Yeah. Okay. Okay. When I was at jump school, it was our second week at jump school. And every morning after breakfast, we'd do a 10-mile run. then we do our training on the 30-foot tower, the 250-foot tower, and all that stuff. Well, this particular morning, and of course we didn't know it because it was being done from a distance, they call us, they stop our run, they bring us up to the bleachers, and what was going on was John Wayne was filming the movie The Green Berets, and we didn't know it at the time, but they filmed us in the background doing our 10-mile run. And I can pick myself out because I was at the back on the side closest to the camera. So you got all these guys in white t-shirts that are doing their 10-mile run. So they used us in the film. We didn't get any credit for it, but it was going to be about 2 hours while they set up the next scene. And John Wayne says, well, I want to talk to these guys. Well, even the Army can't say no to John Wayne. So they bring us up in the bleachers, and for 2 hours, we all got to shake hands with him and talk to him and ask questions. And this guy was like super patriotic, and it was just an awesome experience. And then when the movie came out, I was at Fort Bragg in training group, and it came out in the summertime. So here we are in the background, and it's like, damn, we're in the movies. So it was pretty cool. And that was my first experience with doing movies. And my buddy Eddie's on here. He knows since then we've done a lot of movies together for both for Hollywood and for like the National Park Service. They're all historical type movies. And the Fulton Skyhook, that's the first time I ever saw it. When I got to Vietnam, we had our own private little, I guess you'd call it our private little Air Force C-130s that were painted black and green with no markings. And they all had the Fulton Skyhook on them. But I only know, I've only read of one instance where that thing was even used. I don't know, it wasn't effective. It was too much. It took a lot to get it set up. And so to get it set up required, they'd have to come in and airdrop the harness that you, and the suit that you put the guy in, and all the balloons and the ropes and all that stuff. So it wasn't something that you would carry in with you on a mission. It was something, it had to be a really special deal. And I've only heard of one instance when it actually got used. But it was a cool idea in concept. It just wasn't, I don't think it was very practical. Let's see. Well, guys, we can go in a lot of different directions here. I mean, it's and I say this tongue in cheek, but I know you're all sitting on the edge of the seat and blah blah blah. Sitting on the edge of your seat waiting for me to tell all these great stories, but I need some help on what stories you want to hear. Mary Jo, I think you're right. It was used way early. The Skyhook. They used it in the movie, but was it ever used after that? Not to my knowledge. And it's kind of a shame because there's probably cases where it could have been used. For instance, a recon team goes in, they capture a prisoner or two or three, and what a great way to get the guy out. But you'd have to have a chopper come in and drop all the stuff for the Skyhook, because that inflatable, that whole deal was really heavy from what I understand. And I never saw one up close, but from what I understand, that whole thing was 75 to 100 pounds. Well, who in the hell is going to carry it on their back through the jungle, So you'd have to come in and drop that. Well, that's like setting off flares, telling everybody, hey, here's where we're at, you know. So it would have been great if it was practical, but it wasn't practical. Let's see, what else can we talk about? I'm just glad to be back in the saddle because it's been, what's it been, 2 months since I've been on. James, that's a good question. The Starlight Scope. Keep in mind, again, that in my time frame, 68 to 70, the Starlight Scope was this big, monstrous thing. It was probably, 2 foot long and about this big around. I mean, it was a monstrous thing. So not practical to carry on a mission because that weight, it probably weighed 15 pounds. Well, you add that 15 pounds to the 75 to 100 pounds you're already carrying. There's a lot of weight. And then again, think about it. What is a Starlight Scope? It gathers ambient light. Well, if you're in triple canopy jungle, there is no ambient light. It's pitch black. I mean, you can't see your hand in front of you. So it wouldn't have been practical. Now, it would be practical somewhere, like for instance, I had one up on Leghorn in December 68. But they couldn't get up to us anyway. So other than just being curious to see if I could see any bad guys, it wasn't useful. Now, that kind of, these stories lead to other stories. When I was down at Fort Campbell last month, I had a conversation with some of the younger guys, and that's something we talked about. And they were curious, and other people on these podcasts have asked the same question. What were some of the things that technology-wise we have today that you wish you had back then? My number one thing has always been a GPS, because the GPS would pick up a signal through the triple canopy jungle. If you had a GPS and it's going to tell you exactly within so many meters of where you're at, it made it a whole lot easier to tell the aircraft up there when you're in a deep situation, this is exactly where I'm at, without having to mess with mirrors and panels and strobe lights and all that good kind of stuff. Okay, what would be the number two thing? And guys are always asking about night vision goggles. Well, again, it goes back to the same thing as the Starlight Scope. For night vision to work, you have to have ambient light, and you don't have ambient light in the thing. So my number two thing would be the heat. What do they call that? The like FLIR. You know, it's the heat. Thermal imaging, because thermal imaging, you're in that triple canopy jungle and it's midnight and you know these bad guys are all around you. With thermal imaging, if they're creeping closer and closer to you, you're going to be able to find them on thermal imaging and know exactly where they're at and how many of them roughly that there are. So those would be my top two things. It's always going to be GPS first, but thermal imaging would come in a close second. And another interesting thing that some of these younger guys brought up down at Fort Campbell is the fact that there's so much reliance in today's world on technology, GPS being one of those things, and they've all got GPSs that they carry with them on their gear and all that. What if the GPS goes down? For what? Well, we always carry spare batteries. What if the GPS goes down for whatever reason? Maybe it's not battery related. Maybe it's a circuit board goes bad or whatever. Well, they don't teach compass and map reading like they used to. That was one of the first things we learned in training group, was how to read a compass and how to read a map and how to figure out where you're at by what's called triangulation and all that. So we learned all that, and we didn't have that reliance on technology. So again, technology is great, but you also have to look at the terrain that you're operating in. If you were in Afghanistan or Iraq, for instance, GPS would be great, night vision would be great, all this other stuff is great. But in triple canopy jungle, you go back to the basics. And, that I found it interesting that some of the younger guys were even talking about that the lack of training on reading a map and a compass as a backup for some of the modern technologies. It's just not there. Uh-oh, something happened here. What? Shit, there we are. I must have hit a key or something. Okay. Jeremy, okay, we did that. But again, James, a thermal imaging would have been perfect for an RON to see what's going on around you. And those few occasions when it happened, it'd pick up a tiger coming through. That would have been crazy. We had one go through one time, but it didn't get close enough to us to present a problem, and we all just kind of froze in place. But you could tell, you could smell it, you could hear it busting through the brush and all that. Let's see. Well,
yeah, we got about 10 more minutes or so, and I've got some stuff I've got to handle here.
okay.
So, guys, y'all, if y'all have got
Let's
some
go.
questions,
Otherwise, let's see. I'm trying to think any stories I could tell. Any encounters with sapper teams while in the jungle? No. Al, the sapper teams were used against at our camps. They didn't use them in the jungle. What we ran into in the jungle was the North Vietnamese developed, I guess you'd call them counter SOG teams. They had teams that were specially trained to come after us, to find us and kill us. And if they knew exactly where we were at, what we learned later, even after the war, was they would get a hold of these counter recon teams and they would truck them down as quick as they could and unload them. And that, a lot of times, what you heard being unloaded when you hear the tailgate drop and the brakes squeal, they're dropping these counter tracker teams to come after us. And that was their only function. That's all they trained for, day after day after day. And they had special classrooms, they had special instructors, and that's all they did was train to kill us. And it's a war, so I mean, you can't not acknowledge it. You can't disrespect what they were doing, because they were doing their thing and we were doing our thing, and somewhere in the middle we meet. Drones, that's probably my third choice. But again, the problem with the drone is it can't see through the triple canopy jungle. It could help you, like, say, locating a bomb crater, for instance, to use as an LZ to pick us up. Yeah, it'd be good for something like that. But again, technology was not back then what it is today, and so your drones back then would have been these great big old cumbersome things that you'd have to put together, and um, um, you know, so I'd say they would have had limited motion. But yeah, I think there's a lot of cases where a drone would have been cool to have, great to have. Here's one about, and I've heard something about this, about some kind of crystal or rock that only monks or enlightened people could activate. I've read about it, but I know absolutely nothing about it. And when I say I've read about it, it's only been in recent times, not in old times. So I can't really speak about it because nobody seems to know what this crystal was. But I don't think I would have ever qualified as a monk. Okay, let's see. Let's see. Um, well, we're kind of stalled out here, bud. We got
Yeah, I
4.5.
guess we can. We're about to hit 2 hours. Guess we can put a pin in it and put out a post on Twitter. And those of everybody that didn't get to catch live today, maybe tell them we'll do a part two on just the open-ended question and pictures when I get this jump drive fixed, and we can kind of just have an open shoot and answer for a part two.
So I'm pretty much available all the time. I just rely on Bud to schedule these things, but it really is helpful. A lot of times, Bud and I will get together the day before or the morning of and kind of go over, okay, where do we want to go with this? But we really rely on questions so that we can really do our best to try to answer all the questions because there's so many newer viewers. But at the same time, um, um, without the questions, it's like today where we're just kind of struggling to fill up time. But I'll be back.
Yeah. Well, next week I've only got one thing scheduled, and that's Navy Seawolf coming on Wednesday. So we'll see about either the first or the latter part of the week, and we'll get it
I
lined up.
can't tomorrow. I can't be live listening on the show tomorrow, but I would encourage everybody because this is going to deal with a backseater that's been missing in action all these years, and what the government has told the family. And I don't want to go into a lot of detail, but I will say this. A lot of guys who were killed in action, what the families were told was not always the truth or accurate as far as to what happened. And the reason for that is basically to protect the families from hearing a lot of gory details. And, um, you know, so a lot of times what you hear, what the government officially tells the family may not be exactly the way it happened, but it's probably the best way for the family to know. And you know, I would never want to be in a position of going, and I was put in this position earlier this year with one individual. Um, does the family really need to know all the gory details? And my feeling is no. It's more important to protect them from all that. All what they really need to know is there a family member? Is he dead? Could he be missing in action and still alive? I don't believe that anybody that was left behind would still be alive today simply because of all the diseases and whatever, including the people that went to Russia. Because when Russia got done interviewing them, they would have been sent to the gulag to hard labor, and you don't come back from that. So, yeah.
But we'll plan on trying to. I'll get with you at the start of the week and see if either the first or the latter part of the week, which one we can line up for you to get back for part 2.
Bud Mary Joe's asking, do you have another show scheduled for today?
No, I have got some stuff to take care of in town, so nope, nothing till tomorrow evening at 5:00 with Mr. Luck.
And I will listen to it over the weekend. Unfortunately, I won't be able to make comments, but I sent Tim Collier. I took a photo of the page that talks about Mr. Patterson. So he's got what I got. And I'm curious to hear about if it differs from what the government told the family.
I'll be anxious to hear a lot of what he's going to be sharing, because he's got a lot of stuff he said he's gonna be telling us. So I'm looking forward to that. But we'll get in touch and we'll line up part 2 for next week.
Okay, everybody. Thank you for listening.
See y'all. Yep. See y'all.